Sometimes it feels like we're trying to squeeze in life in between days of work.
What would you like to see your life be like? What are some of the things you can do to really enjoy and live your life as you're working and going through your career? Well, we're going to talk about one of those things today, and that is taking a sabbatical. It's not something that's talked about in medicine very often, but I think it's a very important concept and something that should become more common. So if you're curious to find out what I mean by a sabbatical, how it kind of works to take a sabbatical, and the reasons why you should seriously consider adding sabbaticals into your life, then stay tuned.
I am Shayne Foley. I am a certified PA for the last 10 and a half years. And in those 10 years, also sort of managed to carve out some time to go travel and live my life outside of work. Last but not least, the PA Blueprint is a passion project that I've started with my business partner, Jordan Fisher, with a goal to sort of give people career education that we thought didn't really quite exist or wasn't as easily accessible as we wanted it to be.
It's so great to have you, Shayne. Let's dive in and talk a little bit about your career path.
Right when I graduated PA school, I took my first sabbatical and then started my first job. So I did the whole credentialing thing while I was on the road, stayed there for about 2 years, and then subsequently took another sabbatical. And then that was between jobs. And then I worked in urgent care for about 4.5 years. And then took another sabbatical. You see a pattern developing here. And then currently I'm working in family medicine, and I've been here for over 4 years. And then who knows from here?
Sabbaticals in medicine is not something that gets talked about a lot. And we're going to talk about this some more. But before we do that, I wanted to hit on the PA Blueprint. Tell us a little bit more about that. What are you guys doing?
We started that in 2021 and hopefully sort of becoming the resource for new graduates, but also practicing PAs, NPs, etc. Topics we typically talk about are finance, so student loans and investing, licensing and credentialing, searching for jobs. So there's a few things that, again, we wish we would have known and we're trying to give to people.
You said this is not just for PAs. It's something that NPs also can get value out of as well, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I would say all healthcare workers, realistically, for the most part, it's universally applicable advice and tips. So burnout is universal, student loans, universal, compensation, universal. So a lot of these things really apply to all healthcare workers.
And how do people find more information about it?
Probably the best place would be starting with our website, and there'd be lots of information and you can sort of navigate with whatever appeals to you. And before I forget, Michelle, for your listeners, we'll offer them a discount. We have some products and services we offer that we think could be really helpful.
Great. Well, thank you. That's very kind. And I'll have those links down below in the description box. And now I want to get to the topic that I'm so excited about and that we're here for, is to talk about sabbaticals. You mentioned in your career path that you've taken several of them. So for people who may not be familiar with the concept, what exactly is a sabbatical?
Succinctly, it's a work respite. So it's a time away from work. So not the standard 1 to 2 weeks of vacation. It's usually 4 weeks or more where you are removing yourself from your everyday career. So maybe that's to pursue your side hustle more full time, or maybe it's just to recover from burnout. Previously, this was sort of an academic thing where professors would go to New Zealand for 6 months and bring back information, and they would have their jobs waiting for them. But now it's been adopted by more institutions, or just people are adopting it for themselves, including myself and my family.
Part of it is not only just the time frame, but I think it's a different mindset too that people go into sabbatical with, because it's about enriching yourself while you're away from work, whether that's through learning more skills or doing something, some hobby you've always wanted to pursue, or even if it's just spending quality time with family. It's the time we never give ourselves during our regular everyday work weeks, right?
Absolutely. I mean, sometimes it feels like we're trying to squeeze in life in between days of work. When you are taking a sabbatical, you have more than enough time typically to recover from burnout or just be able to separate yourself. So a clear delineation.
Tell me more about why you think it's important for people to do this now instead of saving those things for retirement.
I think it's important to live your life over the course of your career. Of course, you can put your head down and you can work for the full 40 years and come up for air, and hopefully they're as golden as they're deemed. But for a lot of people, that's not the case. Whatever life happens, you could have illness, things can get in the way of that plan. So it's nice to be able to take blocks of time over the course of your career where you can really feel like you're living your life, separate yourself from your work. And I want to point out the fact that I think it's organically available potentially for folks like PAs or in healthcare. So like if you find a new job, oftentimes you may have a period of 1, 2, 3 months where you're getting credentialed for your next job. And so there could be a delay. That would be a time where you could consider taking that time off.
I also think you have to live your life as it comes. And especially if you have kids, they're not those ages, but for a short period of time, and you're missing that while you're working. I think a lot of people are probably watching is like, well, sure, yeah, I'd love to take some time off, but how? How do you do that?
The logistics of it all are the piece where I think people start to get a little intimidated. This is where it separates people from dreamers to doers, right?
Right.
And so it is challenging. I'll also add that within those challenges and with the logistics, there's a lot of fun. It's actually kind of fun to plan these things, but there's a lot to really think about and unpack. And maybe if I could just go high level and state probably the best thing that you can do is if you're thinking about a sabbatical, is think about, realistically, when would be a good time to do that? And then start dreaming. What might that look like? What would you really want to do? Then you got to take action. And the first action that I would recommend would be just do a life inventory of your possessions, of your relationships, of your passions, and just sort of see where you might see some patterns, room for growth. An example would be if you and your spouse close quarters don't work well for you, then you're not an RV couple, right? You're not someone who should go ahead and live van life. So those are the sorts of things I mean by a life inventory. And then just more about like, your possessions and what would you want to keep? What would you do with those things? But allow yourself to dream and don't let the doing and the action sort of get in the way of that.
Why don't you maybe share how you did those 3 different sabbaticals so we can kind of see by example?
Yeah, it's good to give specifics. The first sabbatical, as I mentioned before, was directly after school. I mean, 3 days after I graduated PA school, I was off. I just needed to go do something. I needed to be me and figure out who I was, reconnect. So I drove cross country for 2 months in my tiny car filled with whatever stuff I had and camped and hiked and just explored places that I really wanted to see. So that made the most sense financially. It also just put me on the road for 2 months to clear my head, sort of regroup after PA school, which we know how tough that is.
Yeah.
And so that was the first one. So I was single for that one. That made planning a lot easier, that's for sure. And then come 2014, I was single at that point. I sort of did my life inventory. I said, all right, what do I have? What do I want to do? And I wasn't seeing friends as much as I wanted to in that first job because it was pretty busy. And so that's part of what I did. I made plans to see those friends I hadn't seen in a while. I hiked a lot because I do really enjoy that. And then I went to South America for 5 weeks and hiked a bit down there. All this was planned. There was nothing too spontaneous about it, but didn't take away from the fun and actually enhanced the fun, I would say.
I just love that point, though, you said earlier about the fun and planning. It's just having something to work on and something to look forward to and plan for can really help if you're feeling a little burnt out or frustrated with your job. Having the light at the end of the tunnel, I think, is really important.
I couldn't agree more. We're always thinking about when would be the next sabbatical. Again, we dream about it and then eventually then we start to do the action to make it happen. But it's good. It's like the carrot, it keeps you going a little bit. I will admit in my urgent care job, I was getting pretty fried for a while. And once my wife and I decided like, okay, here's our plan. We had like 1 or 2 years where we started planning. And so it made it a lot lighter knowing that that was coming. And the closer we got, the more excited we got. We specifically challenged each other to come up with 5 things a piece. So we each had 5 must-dos over the course of that period. And we said, well, we will do those 10 things. And then anything else after that, we'll just sort of figure out as we go.
Having some direction for that time off, so you don't end up 2 months later like, oh, all I did was sit on the couch or and watch TV, or I didn't
Yeah.
do anything I really wanted to do. So I think that is important to have a list of things that you want to accomplish, or some kind of game plan, so that you don't feel that time was wasted.
Structure is good. And even if it's, hey, I'm going to take acoustic guitar lessons 3 times a week for the first 3 months, that's a start. It doesn't really
Yeah.
have to be anything big.
The third sabbatical you took, you were married then at that point. Does your wife also work in healthcare, or is she in a different industry?
Yeah, so actually my wife is a teacher. Her school year typically ends in June. So in that sabbatical in 2018, we just started right around July 1st or so. We basically did a full school year because that made the most sense with our calendars.
When we talk about a sabbatical, like in the traditional sense, people associated with academia, like being a professor or something, and taking a paid sabbatical. But when we're talking about taking a sabbatical in medicine, it's an unpaid sabbatical, right?
I would expect in the next 5, 10 years that there will be some institutions within medicine that see the value of sabbaticals and may offer like, minimal pay or kind of hold your job with like a FMLA type situation. But for the most part, yeah, they're really out of pocket. There's ways to sort of minimize the impact of that. But yeah, usually it's something that you're going to have to pay for yourself. That's one of the things, finances, and then career wise, people are afraid to step away and what that looks like and how to recover from that, or if it's a good or bad thing even.
And what kind of tips do you give people to be able to step away for 3 months or 9 months, not having an income?
So you could either try to have some income during the sabbatical to offset the cost. So that would be helpful. Most of us, though, will sort of look at trying to minimize expenses instead. And I would suggest that people try to save up about 6 months of their spending. Well, depending, I guess, on how long you're going to be gone for. As far as income, I mean, I would put side hustles on there. I would put your possessions if you want to sell those off. You can cash in your earn time if you have that saved up. You could work extra shifts. So it's kind of that balance to, again, sort of offset some of the expenses, but it's good to estimate what your expenses would be. So if you think you're going to go live in the south of France for 6 months, then check that out. Go to Airbnb, go to VRBO. What might that cost you? And then start to, best to probably write it down, make a list, a spreadsheet to have an idea what it's going to cost. But you really need to start looking at those X's and O's and then start your actual plan of action probably a year ahead of time before you are ready to take off.
If you want to do this, it really needs to be a priority in your life. You are going to have to make some sacrifices to either work more or start cutting down. And of course, what you do on a sabbatical, you'll have to adjust based on how much money you can set aside for it. But this is completely doable, especially for people in our profession and the money that we make. If you make it a priority, I think people can make it happen.
We should look at it as a life investment or an investment in yourself. So when we hear investment, we're probably thinking about our 401ks and our Roth IRAs. And, usually our advice is, hey, try to max those things out. But basically with your allocation, you sort of might want to pull that back a little bit and start putting some in like a savings account and watch that grow over the course of a year, or some other strategy. There's lots of ways to do it. It just depends on what your goals are and how much money you need, et cetera. But, that's the way we look at it. These are life investments. These will be investments that we'll do with our child and future children if we have any others. So although we may not have a higher 401k because of it, I think our life is going to be more enriched because of it, realistically. So it's just usually more of a matter of shifting things around, but it's also a shift of your priorities as well.
If people see that you've left medicine for 3, 6, 9 months at a time, do you think that hurts your career in any way? And do you think it makes it harder to get a job once you come back from sabbatical?
Well, I can only go off of my experiences so far. And I will say that what happens is that you see envy on people's faces and you don't see anybody who's saying, well, I don't know if I'll hire you. It's actually been a wonderful talking point during interviews. In fact, I'll again try to give specifics here, but I remember my current job that I'm working at right now. I remember taking my first interview outside of our RV on the Oregon coast and saying that within the first 30 seconds that, they said, how are you? And I said, I couldn't be better. And here's why. And so, like, right away, we had this wonderful talking point. We shared some places that we were traveling that they had been to. And right away, the conversation was nice and relaxed. I love explaining that during the credentialing process. Well, what were these gaps? And you have to put them into your, credentialing information. And I love to write that. There's been no negative whatsoever. Like I said, if
Yeah.
anything, good talking points, easy to sort of make friends and have people be a little bit of envious because they say, I wish I could do that, and then I say, well,
Yeah,
you can. Let's talk
you
about it.
can. Locums is a great way to build sabbaticals into your life. And then you don't ever have to explain gaps. You're like, oh, I worked locums. I didn't pick up any assignments during that time.
Yeah, yeah. It's just hashtag locums and the conversation
Yeah,
is
yeah.
done, right?
Yeah, and if people are watching and are curious about locums, I've done a video on locums. I'll put a card up here somewhere that you can click to that video to see more about working locums. But I agree with you. I don't think that it's going to hurt. I think there are some options that would appeal to an employer and then could help you with your career. And some of that would be like acquiring new skills while you're on sabbatical, whether it's down in South America doing some Spanish immersion. And so you come back and you're bilingual. What would that mean to your employer? How would that help them? Or if you went and took some courses and you learned some new skill that could be lucrative to the practice, either you come back to your employer or you come back and you find a new job with your new skills, making more than you were making before. You have to free up your mind a little bit and think outside the box and see how this can help your life and your finances in the future.
I think sabbaticals do make a career potentially more sustainable. So yeah, maybe you work for longer, but you've had time off during. But what you're saying about acquiring skills, I think is great. I mean, it doesn't have to be related at all to what you're doing clinically, but it actually gives you sort of the headspace to sort of say, okay, I've stepped away. Let me evaluate my career up to this point. What do I enjoy the most? Maybe you can evaluate, well, actually, I'm not loving my job because of X, Y, and Z. Then how do you fix that? It gives you the time, gives you the headspace, but also the time for action to acquire a new skill. Because when you're working full time, it's so hard to then do night classes or weekend classes. I mean, that's the piece that, like, we all want to keep progressing and growing, but we find ourselves so kind of burnt out and not having the time to do that. And you're right. You could absolutely come charging back and say, hey, I know that you're looking for more providers in addiction medicine. I've taken these courses, I have this certification, and here's what you're going to pay me.
You don't have to, but I think it helps to step away to be able to assess what it is that you really like, what it is that's really bothering you, and what would you like to see your life be like? When do we ever get to do that as adults?
Yeah, many of us don't. Many of us don't. And I like the
Yeah.
example it sets for our peers, but even more so now being a parent.
People who may not have looked at it or thought about overseas, but for $1,000 a month, you could live like a king or a queen. I mean,
Yeah.
food's cheaper, rent's cheaper, experiencing a culture for another place, and it doesn't cost you that much. So lots of options out there. Sorry, I get excited because this is
No, it's an exciting topic. I mean, when you allow yourself, like I said, allow yourself to dream about it and think of the possibilities. Again, for some people, they just get sort of freaked out by too many choices, too many options, too much open space. I need some boundaries somewhere. But for a lot of us, that's amazing. And then one thought leads to the next. And, eventually, if you're going to take the sabbatical, the reality comes in about like, well, what can I actually do? What can I actually afford? But you're right. I mean, there's so many workarounds. There are so many different iterations of taking a sabbatical. So it's fun. It should be super exciting, and the possibility of that. And again, I think a lot of people dream, but they stop at the doing, at the action stage. And hopefully we'll inspire people to maybe take a baby step and start working towards it.
I think sometimes people have to hear that other people are doing it and to kind of give themselves permission and
Mm.
to say, maybe that crazy idea I have isn't so crazy. Other people are doing it and
Yeah.
it is possible. But when it comes to your career side and your current employer, do you have any advice or any thoughts for people who might want to approach their employer to see if this is even something that the employer would be open to?
I don't know for sure if you showed your employer your hand and you said, I'm going to take a sabbatical, I'd like to take a sabbatical, what that would mean. Would that put you on the chopping block? Will they sort of overlook you for promotions? Don't know, honestly. I haven't necessarily seen that play out. My strategy, at least, I can share. Typically, I look for precedents within the organization, find those confidants that you could say, hey, I'm thinking about this sabbatical thing. Have you ever heard of that? Do you know of anyone? And inevitably, there's usually one or two people that have done it for a medical mission or whatever. So if there's precedents, that's great. You can reference that. So you know someone's blazed the trail. So hopefully they figured out the logistics for you. So if you think maybe you would want to wind up back with your employer, obviously you want to leave them with plenty of notice, and also you want to leave on good terms. You may be able to get it in writing where they're going to have you back. Maybe they're willing to hire a locums rather than hiring someone full time because you are a known entity. Hopefully you're a high performer. They really like you. And so they'd probably rather have you go away for a little bit and come back knowing how good you are.
I would go into that conversation knowing that if they're saying no, what your next step is already going to be. But if it's a job you really, really like, but you really need to get away, I think there's ways you can sell it. By saying, I love where I work, I love being a part of it, and I want to continue being a part of it. But I feel like I'm at a point where I need to step away for just a little bit so that I can continue to give excellent care when I come back. Is this something that we can explore where I can be gone for 3 months or 6 months? They do it for maternity leave. They do it when people have FMLA things. It's not unheard of. And if you are going to be gathering any skills along the way, that's also something that you can throw in to kind of sweeten the pot a little bit. Now, you have the PA blueprint, and I'm sure there's great advice in there for people too to help get their finances under control, to be able to do stuff like this. But if people have any more specific questions about sabbaticals, would you be open to the PA blueprint to people sending you an email or asking you more information?
And that is what we do. We try to educate people, we try to empower them. So if we can do those two things for you, absolutely. If you have a question, you want to talk more specific, get into the weeds a little bit, happy to do that because this is a topic that I really like to talk about. And I hope that we at least inspired people to think more about it, but maybe inspired people to actually take some action.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Shayne. I love this topic so much, and I can't even explain to you how important I think it is and how much I love the idea of people living their lives to the fullest while they're working instead of deferring it for a retirement that may never come. Thank you so much for watching today. If you've liked this video, then please hit the thumbs up and share it with colleagues who might find it interesting. Well, that's it for now. Take care, stay sane, and I'll see you next time on the Medicine Couch. Bye.